Hi everyone, it's Cammy here. Thank you so much for listening to this week's Heart and Hand. If you happen to listen to the shows on the Apple, Android, or Spotify platforms, could you please give Heart and Hand a follow on there? They may also ask you to write a wee review, and if you could write us a really good one, we would massively appreciate it. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast. This is your extra show for the week. My name is Cameron Bell. I'm your host as always, and it is a pleasure and a privilege to welcome along my guest this week, Mr. Ross Hutton. Ross, how are you? How are things going? Have you finally been able to dry yourself out after what was a wet and dreary Ibrox on Tuesday night?
Hi, Cammy. Hi, listeners. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be here as always. I was wearing shorts last night, if you can believe it or not, to the game, because even though it was pouring the rain, right, and for anyone who was watching it on TV, the weather was as bad as it looked, right? It was horrendous, but it was that kind of muggy, spring, warm type rain. So I was quite comfortable sitting there in shorts, didn't get soaked or anything like that. It was quite pleasant from my point of view. I would not have wanted to have played in those conditions, and for the first 45 minutes, I don't think the Rangers players wanted to play in those conditions either. That's a subject we'll get on to.
Yeah, there's a big age difference between you and I, Ross, and I would say that you're one of those Gen Zs that probably wears shorts when it's not short wearing weather. You probably wear trainers without socks. I'm of the age now where I do get the benefit of not having my jacket on indoors, so that you get the benefit when you do step outside. That's just a big difference, I think.
I've been brought up in the school of the benefit, and I know David Edgar talks about this quite a lot as well. I am a big believer in the benefit, but May is shorts weather, right? I'm no surrender to the non-shorts weather stuff. May is shorts weather, and until maybe mid-September, it will continue to be shorts weather, and that's kind of my outlook on it. You don't get an awful lot of opportunities in Scotland to wear shorts, so I maximise it when I do.
Yeah, I hope you go through a field of nails. But as we are talking about weathering storms, Ross, Rangers had to do that on Tuesday night. Just so you're aware, listeners, we're recording this on Wednesday before what I think most pessimists and realists would say is probably going to be Celtic's league-winning game at Kilmarnock. But Ross, this isn't about them. This is about us. And I think it's fair to say Ibrox was far from full on Tuesday night. I think that's perfectly fair. I absolutely do not criticise anyone who struggled to be able to get the motivation to make the effort. Um, I think it was interesting because at the beginning of the game, and again, you saw the lineup because the manager had said in the press conference the day before that we did have a number of injuries. That certainly was proven to be true with the starting lineup, and I don't think it was a hostile atmosphere. I don't think it was difficult. Everyone's disappointed, right? There's no point pretending otherwise, of course, in terms of the Old Firm defeat and effectively sealing any real opportunity we had of being able to get the league. And the Rangers players, I thought, there was some decent movement to begin with. It looked like there was a good bit of energy. But the inevitable nonsense, Ross, came into play. And I did think, well, Dundee are a physical team, but they can play well. I'm no fan of Tony Docherty, as any regular listeners will know. I do have to give some degree of credit to him and Dundee for obviously where they're going to end up finishing in the league, because I do think it's merited. What I didn't think was on the cards, however, was to be 2 goals down 5 minutes before half time. I think the phrase I used on our Patreon site, we always do a car pod immediately after the game. And the phrase I used last night was believable disbelief. Because despite how well we were trying to go, and we had some decent shots and target, Ross McCausland was very unlucky with one before he eventually got the goal just on the brink of half time. Honestly, I couldn't believe what I was watching. I genuinely couldn't believe it until I had a word with myself and thought, why are you surprised? We're going to talk a little bit, Ross, about the manager's comments post-game, but at 2-0 down, and as I say, just coming into half-time, I think the atmosphere did turn pretty hostile at that point. I think that was perfectly fair, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think going into the game, you heard all the kind of usual shouts, and I say usual shouts because it has become a habit these end of season games at Ibrox where nothing really much is on the line. The league is gone for all intents and purposes, and you do get those kind of usual shouts of, "Oh, let's go and hound those players and get on their backs at every opportunity, every missed pass, every poor shot, whatever." It never really ever materializes like that. You always get the sort of big licks on Twitter or whatever, but it never really comes to fruition at the actual game until the Rangers players go and do what they did last night, which is go 2 goals down. And listen, I know we said we're recording before the game at Rugby Park, the Celtic have, and let's be honest, they will probably win the league by the time that game is done. But it would just be one more embarrassment, one more nail in that embarrassment coffin, so to speak, if we had handed them the league title like that at Ibrox last night. And at 2-0 down, that's exactly what was going through everybody's minds. And it's another theme of this Rangers team as well. And I know the manager's spoken in the press conference before the game about the hopeful big turnover we are going to have in the summer. And we're all absolutely desperate for that because we're sick of the sight of most of these players. But there they were, one last time at Ibrox, playing the hits, that ball across the box into the back post that nobody deals with. And it doesn't matter what centre half partnership you have there, it doesn't matter what back four you have there. Nobody over the piece has ever learned how to deal with one of those balls in the Rangers jersey. So nice to see those hits being played last night. Quite comforting in many ways that you're still going to see that right up until the end of this squad. And then obviously the second goal, it's a mix of horrific defending on our end, nobody really getting out to the ball, and fair's fair. It's a good finish, maybe a wee bit of a lucky one as well. I think the boy who scored it looked as surprised as everybody else did in that moment. But again, that playing the hits, that theme of conceding goals and bunches and the heads completely going. Now, fair to the team, they came back and recovered from that. But it's just another reminder, never even mind the comeback, it's another reminder about why this squad does need to be burnt to the ground and then raised up again. Because this is what they do. It doesn't matter who's in there. It doesn't matter, as I say, the defence or the midfield or anything like that. They do have this within them just to completely mentally switch off after conceding a goal, and then they go and concede another one right afterwards as well. It happened at Parkhead the other day, and it happened at Ibrox last night. And it's deeply frustrating for fans because you can watch these mistakes happening in real time. It almost feels as though it's happening in slow motion, actually. But we've seen them a million times before, whether it's in league games, whether it's in Europe. That, especially for the first goal, as I say, that same ball just across the face of the goal, nobody ever deals with. So we'll talk about the manager's comments, I know, when we get to the kind of post-match reaction. Cammy, and I think he was as angry as we all were, which is good to see. We want that, and we're glad that he recognises it. But as fans who have been here for a lot longer than Clement has, we have watched that goal so many times. And if there's one thing that can come out of this summer rebuild, is I never ever want to fucking see it again.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. We know how obviously the game turned out, but I suppose if you had to take something from last night's first half display, it's the manager now has to make some pretty stark assessments on the players that he knows will be here after the summer. Because listen, we're all involved in the WhatsApp groups and social media and everything else as well, and you know it's as a football fan, it's reactionary. You're kind of saying to yourself, right, I want the scorched earth approach you said earlier on, you know, burn it to the ground and build it again. And of course, you naturally have that reaction because no one wants to see their team play poorly. But for me, this is where Clement has to be able to almost start setting some standards with the players that he knows he's going to be working. We're not going to have a 15 to 20 player turnover. Do you know what I mean? It's not going to work like that. We're going to have to look at who's going to stay, who's going to go. I think that you know we've already started to see some of that coming out in the media today, and that for me would be the only silver lining on that cloud in terms of just seeing how poor we were to react to that. We have, as you've just touched on there, a systemic problem that we fail to really return to form as soon as we've had a punch laid on us. And then when that second punch comes into us, when you do that against bigger teams, as we have seen against this season, it, in some instances, they're a knockout blow. And again, I don't want to take anything away from Dundee because as much as you and I can very much agree on the fact that there was a lot of player failings last night, because we've seen it throughout this team. By and large, I don't think there was too many people disagreed that Dundee had deserved their lead. They can play decent football. They were very physical. I noted several times that the number 28 Silla, I think, was getting really heavy-handed with Todd Cantwell in particular. I'm very, very surprised that he didn't make the book, and I think that some of the guys who are watching on TV actually said that it looked like the referee after one of the fouls had said, do that again, you're going in the, you're going in the book, and 3 or 4 fouls later, still no caution. So, in spite of all of that, Ross McCausland, thankfully, was able to get back in. Had a good chance before his goal, Ross, where he created some great opportunity. He was pretty much in and around the penalty spot, had the entire goal at his mercy. He had a bit of a lash at it. Great save by the Dundee keeper, but also a chance to me that it felt like it was harder to miss. I don't know if I'm being unduly unfair on him.
No, you're being absolutely correct, and this will be the point where people will expect me to come out and bat for Ross McCausland and try and say that chance was harder than what it was. No, it was awful. It was an awful miss. He had the opportunity there to either pass it to Dessers or do what he done, which is go himself. But if you're going to do that, you have to score, son. You have to. And if you want to sum up our entire season, Cammy, in a bit of a microcosm, that period of the game is exactly it. You think of different games throughout the season, up at Dingwall being another fantastic example where we have a great chance up at Dingwall to extend our lead, or in this game with Ross McCausland to take the lead. We don't take it. The other team gets a bit of a boost, they run up the pitch and score. In this case, twice. Obviously, Dingwall, we lost that game. It's just another example of how profligate we are in front of the opposition goal, which then costs us at the other end in our own. Again, we talk about looking forward into next season and what we need to be able to see. On one end of the scale, at the defensive side, I never want to see that ball across the box goal again because I'm absolutely sick of it. On the other side, there needs to be some upgrades in the forward areas. Now, Ross McCausland is not the problem this season. He is not the be-all and end-all issue with Rangers being a wasteful side in front of goal. As I've said on every single podcast where we've mentioned Ross McCausland, the last person who expected him to play this volume of games is Ross McCausland. Right? I sound like a broken record, but I want to hammer home that point again. But you need to be able to have guys around him, guys to support him, so you're not relying on a kid like Ross McCausland. You need that quality in those areas who can take those chances. And that leads on to the other problem that we've had all through this season, Cammy, is those injuries. Another thing that is just unsustainable for a side that wants to be successful. If you had Sima in the side, or Cortez in the side, or Danilo in the side, or you could have any kind of interchangeable front three you want in there, then yeah, maybe that chance does get converted. We're 1-0 up and we're having a very different conversation, not just about that game, but if you want to extrapolate over the course of a season, we're maybe having a very different end of season conversation as well. So there's a lot of different things, and just within those moments last night that I think you could paint a broader picture with as to why this season has panned out the way it has. It's deeply frustrating, but in that moment, just in and of its own in isolation, Ross has to do so much better. Gets a bit of redemption with the goal getting us back into it, but listen, if you want to be a Rangers player and sustain yourself as a Rangers player at this level, which Ross McCausland obviously does, those are the chances you need to bury as an absolute non-negotiable.
Yeah, Rangers come out, same team for the second half, and thankfully Cyril Dessers is able to get onto a Todd Cantwell cross to be able to finish. And I thought this was a great header. I thought that this looked controlled. Now, listen, Cyril Dessers has been a constant topic of conversation across the course of this season, Ross. He, is obviously now, and I think it's 22 goals, 23 goals, I can't remember off the top of my head, but 20 plus anyway, which I think if you had said back in September, you probably would have been looked at like you had two heads. However, I'm going to have to give the big man credit here because there was a period, I don't know if you remember it in the first half, it was early on before we were behind, where he felt some contact in his back. He went down very easily. He looked towards the referee and he was doing the shoving motion. He expected to be given a penalty for it. It was never a penalty in a million years. And then towards the kind of the middle piece of the first half, then get into again, like I say, the remainder of the game. he started to do some really, really good hold-up play for me. He dealt really well with the physical element of it, and that's not something that you would have been able to put to him, September, October last year. He was very lightweight, and I think that he's learned to be able to try and deal with the more physical aspects of the game. You don't see as many challenges of him going down and then making appeals to the referee. But this goal in particular, and listen, his headed goals are becoming a bit of a running theme at the moment. I thought it was just a great finish. He gets up well. It is a great cross. Again, it lays it on a plate for him. He still has to do some work where he has to get the kind of glancing header on it, project it down the way, which is, for me, always what you should do with headers. And Rangers find themselves at 2-2, which, again, like I say, was very much a warm change to what we wanted to be able to do in what was a rather blustery and wet night. I can't tell you what's going to happen with Cyril Dessers. I think that if he leaves Ibrox in the summer, I genuinely don't think there'd be too many Rangers fans at this stage who'd be clamouring to keep him. But you have to give him credit, Ross, on the goals that he's scoring, because he is being consistent no matter what across the final piece of the season. He's improved in a lot of the aspects of his game. I think his fitness has increased. I think he does a lot of running, and he's not always going to be blessed with pace. I think we realise that, but he does have some, decent stamina. He's lost weight, across the course of the last few months, which is obviously helping him. And then you have this finish, which again, for me, just is like a striker's finish. Now that sounds like as if I'm not paying him enough credit for that, but where he was to where he is now, I think you do have to give him praise on a level of improvement. Of course, we're not happy that we're not going to win the league. Of course, we understand that. I do think, however, that given the fact that he is basically the only person that we can really play in that position that we could get some traction out of, I think you do have to be able to give him credit for a guy who, at one point in his Rangers career, was booed when he walked off the park, to last night he got a standing ovation when he off.
And listen, that is remarkable in and of itself. I mean, if we do think back to that first Old Firm at Ibrox where he was coming off and being booed in the process of doing so, he became emblematic of everything that was wrong with our start to the season. Obviously, he was offering pretty much nothing at that point, and I'll go and I'll praise him in a wee minute, but let's not rewrite history. He was god-awful for the first part of the season under Michael Beale, and he became emblematic of the awful transfer policy that Michael Beale was implementing over the summer and the money that was perceived to have been wasted at that point. Now, on Sam Lammers, that has borne to be true. I know he's having a good time over at Utrecht, but didn't do it, didn't cut it for Rangers. The output that Cyril Dessers has provided this season is really good. You can't argue with 22 goals a season. It's a really, really good level of output for a striker. And listen, see if he does go in the summer, he does go with my best wishes. And I think towards the start of the season, I was one of his harshest critics. But as I say, it's a hell of a lot of output there. So if he does, then thank you very much for your services, Cyril. The problem on our end is that if you are losing him, which is a possibility, we're not a squad teeming with sellable assets right now. I think that's fair to say. So if you're looking around at players who you maybe could sell to try and fund a bit of a rebuild, he would be on that list. As much as it's a hell of an output this season, it's a hell of an output to lose for next season as well. So you would need to try and find a way of either getting another striker in who can hit the ground running, even though he didn't, but someone who can come in and hit the ground running for Champions League qualification and the early part of the league season, who can hopefully try and get to those same or similar numbers. The other option is you get a multitude of players in who can provide you that goals, which is probably the better option, to be honest. You can spread that responsibility about because, again, comes down to that fact the injuries haven't helped us this season. Ideally, you would have been able to rotate Dessers in and out with Danilo, but fair play to him, he's been consistent. He's been the one plugging away, game in, game out. He's not let that really bad start at Rangers affect him in a way that I think 99% of other professionals would have, because it's a remarkable thing to come back from. The mental strength you need to display to come back from that is, I think, worthy of praise in and of itself. But as I say, he would be, or the numbers at least would be, a big loss next season. I think the frustration for us watching Dessers this season is that his 22 goals should have been 42 goals with the chances that he misses. And there was one later on in the second half as well where he should have just shot first time, does that trademark touch, and then the chance is gone. So we know his limitations well enough by now. But as I say, as somebody who might be looking at the exit door in the summer, he would leave with my best wishes, because he's not the sole reason where we are right now. And actually, without some of his big important goals, I kind of dread to think where we would be.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And again, you know, I'm not saying that he's the finished article. I'm not suggesting that at all. But listen, we have been quick to criticise, and I think that we have to be fair and be quick to praise where it's absolutely merited. Vid van Yilmaz comes off in our mark, Ross, for Robbie Fraser. Now, as you mentioned earlier on, obviously you do a lot of the youngsters coverage on our Patreon site as well. Yilmaz building himself back up to being able to try and get to 90 minutes. Again, I mentioned beforehand about some of the treatment that Todd Cantwell was getting, and listen, we're gonna inevitably talk about it with regards one eye on Hampden. I was worried about injuries, and I think it's sensible game management by the manager. The biggest praise I can give Robbie Fraser last night was that I didn't see a discernible dip in quality at left, but I think he did very, very well last night, Fraser. And the most important thing I think for me is that we give an opportunity to some of these guys as and when, because looking towards the future and looking to build, then that's perfectly fair. And if we can keep Yilmaz fit over the next two games, and if he is able to get to 90 or potentially 120 minutes against Celtic, then we'll be a far stronger team as far as I'm concerned. But I'm very pleased to see Robbie Fraser coming on. The manager has made reference to obviously being able to incorporate the youths. It is something that we have lacked in terms of being able to consistently produce, youth talent. And so for me, albeit it was a game that's still sitting at this point at 2-2, we know there's not much to play for, but we're still in a fairly physical, tight game. And again, I think across the half hour that he had, I think he acquitted himself very well.
Delighted for Robbie Fraser on a personal level more than anything else, because he's had to be incredibly patient to get his opportunity and get his chance. Been a fantastic captain of the B team over the years. James will tell you the same. When we've been out and covering B team games would have maybe had a really bad performance or a really bad result, he's always the first one to come out, front up for it, say they need to improve. He's a kind of guy you'd want to have in the trenches with you. But he's had to watch other players get opportunities before he has. You think of Ross McCausland, Cole McKinnon, who obviously also came on last night. They've been involved before he has, and he's been a wee bit of a victim of Borna's longevity within this squad, and obviously Ridvan Yilmaz's talent. So there's not really been the same level of opening there at left back that he would maybe have benefited from had there been. But again, looking to the future, we're definitely going to lose Borna in the summer. We might lose Yilmaz as well if a decent bid comes in. So there's two left back positions in the squad opening up. We'll probably bring another senior left back in at that point. But if Robbie Fraser can show the manager that he's a competent professional left back, so you don't need to go and buy a second choice one, there you go. He's got his promotion. He's got his step up into the first team playing squad, and there's an avenue there to getting more minutes. Even in Robbie Fraser's career, there's been plenty of crossroads. Last summer was one of them where he did sign an extended deal with Rangers in the Rangers Academy. And I think James and I at the time were a wee bit concerned for him more than anything else. We raised an eyebrow because, like I say, he's a cracking young guy. He's a kind of guy you really want to succeed, not just obviously at Rangers, but in the sport as well. You always want these kids to go and have a good career, even if they don't make it with us. So we were a wee bit worried as to whether his development would stall and if his career would stall on the back of that. But if, as I say, he can put himself in the manager's eye and become a serious member of the squad for the next season, then that totally justifies that decision and the faith that he's shown in Rangers. And as I say, he's just a brilliant young guy that really wanted to do well. So I was delighted for him more than anything else when he came on last night.
And then Todd Cantwell decided to step up and provide a moment of absolute brilliance, Ross.
Absolute luck. Are we doing this?
Well, I'm going to side with him and just say that he scored this goal just in front of where I sit at Ibrox, and the coolest celebration I think I've seen from a guy who's absolutely sclaffed in a worldie. But listen, all joking aside, of course he plants in a cross that absolute whip on it, some great power. I don't think he could do it again if he tried, if I'm perfectly honest. But for those fans who had made the effort to be able to try and get there last night, who stayed after going 2-0 down, um, a goal which I think you were just glad that I think you saw it in the flesh. But listen, it was a tidy finish from him. When I think that, as I say, he's massively overhit across and it's just smashed in at the keeper's top right hand corner. Rangers are now in front, thankfully. I think that there was a bit of a kind of collective sigh of relief from those in the ground because we wanted to see a win, right? Final home game of the season at Ibrox, and we wanted to be able to see a win. Todd Cantwell puts us in front with this. The goal is a fluke, but I've got to give the boy credit for just absolutely bossing it with celebration.
No, and I know we're kind of joking there about the absolute luck, absolute skill side of things, but a really important goal and a really important moment in the context of that game, like the Dessers one as well. Dessers coming out so quickly after half time and getting that equaliser, but what 20 minutes after the break at this point, and maybe frustration starting to set in, and the crowd are not beginning to turn again, but getting a wee bit more restless, obviously, as we're in the pursuit of that winning goal. So to come up with a moment like that, whether he meant it or not, none of us really care, to be honest. Nobody who was there cares. No Rangers fan cares. I went in the back of the net, and that's all that counts. And even throughout the game last night, Todd Cantwell was being kicked up and down the park absolutely relentlessly with no help, assistance, or protection from the referee. And he done well not to be overly frustrated and annoyed by that, in the way that we've seen Cantwell get frustrated and annoyed in the past, where he maybe gets involved in histrionics or gets involved in up in the other opposition players' faces. And there was none of that last night, which was really good and positive to see. He kept picking himself back up and going again and going again and going again. So I was absolutely delighted for him to get his goal, as I say, whether he meant it or not.
Yeah, the jury's out, but I think they're going to come back with a verdict that it does not fall favourably for Todd Cantwell if he did mean it or not. But anyway, again, looking at the positives last night, we got a strong performance, I think, from Todd Cantwell, despite that treatment that we've both mentioned. A goal will do nothing but good for his confidence, which I think is perfectly fair. There's a raft of substitutions across the course of the kind of next 20 minutes or so, Ross. And I think the game was pretty much done as a contest after the third goal. The manager brings on Cole McKinnon, as you mentioned, for Leon King, Scott Wright, Kieran Dowell, and Kamal Roof all come on, and it's Scott Wright, obviously knowing that we are heading to Hampden pretty soon, comes up with a couple of pretty decent goals. I've got to say, Kieran Dowell gets onto the end of a kind of loose ball at the box, and we've seen it a lot, right? Where the almost the stereotypical thing to do in that situation is to just bat it right back across goal, take your chances, see what happens. He elects to be able to loft it in at the back post. Really good opportunity for Wright. Now, and again, I want to talk a little bit about composure here. From that angle and from that distance from goal, a player could be tempted just to try and put his laces through it. But a nice composed finish by Scott Wright. And then he follows up, obviously, with his second goal to make it 5-2 to Rangers. I'm going to come back to that point again, Ross. It's good to be able to get these players involved. It's also good to be able to get them goals because whilst we have in all but name a friendly at Tynecastle on Saturday, we do obviously have a huge game against Celtic for so many reasons, and we'll obviously talk about that in the build-up next week. But again, good to see Scott Wright being able to get involved within this. I'll come back to what I said previously about Dessers. If Scott Wright was to leave in the summer, I don't think there'd be too many Rangers fans upset about that. But I also think as well, if you're to need a player to be able to come on with 20 minutes to go, if you're sitting 0-0 against Celtic in the Scottish Cup final, it would be hard to argue against the inclusion of Scott Wright. Kieran Dowell has come out of the cold. Whether or not he features, we don't know in terms of the next couple of games. But it just rounded off a kind of nice feeling for it as well. because in comparison to what the atmosphere would have been like to get these players off the park for their final home game, and for some of them, the last time that they'll play on the park at Ibrox competitively, I think was just a kind of nice finish.
Yeah, it was good for Scott Wright, and saw a screenshot of his post-match interview with Sky, and the caption said it was his first goals in the Premiership in 44 games or something mad like that, which I think probably, I don't want to be too down, but probably does again point to that issue we have in the squad of just a lack of kind of quality and options there when we really need them when the crunch time is, and last night was not the crunch time. As nice as it was and as good as it was and as vital as it felt in the moment to get the win and to get those goals and take nothing away from Scott Wright, there were two very good goals for very different reasons. It doesn't happen over the course of the piece, and that's why not too many Rangers fans would be shedding a tear if he left in the summer. Not a player who would leave with any ill will on my part, but a player who I don't see any kind of long term future for in this Rangers squad. And really, if we're being honest, he shouldn't be in this Rangers squad. He was away in the summer. If we can think back to
Yeah, he
that
had one
summer
foot in the
last year.
plane, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, there was an interview in what was it, in Glasgow Airport, where he was saying, "Aye, good luck to Michael Beale and the boys. Love my time at Rangers," and here he is, still kicking about and scoring goals, which is good for him. But we need an upgrade on Scott Wright going forward. He's not the kind of player that we can be relying on next season. We do have to rely on him when he will be used in the next two games this season. Obviously, Tynecastle is what it is on Saturday. I'm sure we're all buzzing for that. But you do have the prospect of a Scottish Cup final coming up, which we mentioned non-negotiable finishes earlier on. This is a non-negotiable game. We simply need to beat Celtic in this. Clement needs it. The squad needs it. Most importantly, the fans need it. We need something to be optimistic about and something to hang on to going into the summer. And Scott Wright does have a part to play in that. He will have a part to play in that, no doubt. Not just because it's at Hampden, and we all know that Scott Wright seems to love that arena, but for the reasons you mentioned, if the game is tight going into the last 20 minutes, and that seems to be asking a hell of a lot of this Rangers side to do anyway, but we'll entertain it for a moment. If it is tight going into those last 20 minutes, his pace can cause teams problems, at least in theory. So if we can build up his confidence before Hampden, maybe starting against Hearts, if we can get a goal or two then as well, and he feels in a really good place, then he could be an asset in that game. As a one-off, yeah, absolutely, but not for the future.
No. So Rangers run out 5-2 winners, Ross. A farewell to Kamar Roof. Borna Barisic as well. Looks like it's going to be his last game at Ibrox. If they feature any point, as I say, over the course of the next couple of games, then I think that by and large they would pretty much go with no ill will, as you say. Now the manager was pretty animated. Our very own David Edgar obviously was at the post-match press conference at Ibrox on Tuesday night and um, made mention of the fact that that was one of the angriest that he's seen him, including defeats. And you in normal taking the league circumstances and the hangover from last weekend out of it, most people would be pretty pleased that you've been able to come back from 2-0 down to win 5-2. The manager, however, it was quite clear was perfectly within his rights to be so pissed off at half time. He was speaking to Rangers TV, Ross, and I think some interesting comments made here in terms of saying they reacted in a good way. They started in a good way with the ball. Without the ball, it wasn't good enough or strong enough. It was not fast enough and good enough on crosses. I was really angry at halftime as they didn't reward themselves and they got booed off, and we deserved that. And I told them that. We got a good lesson because after the game, they all got praise, everyone was happy, and we got a lot of applause and nice songs. They had a good feeling, but it's about what you do with and without the ball. In the second half, we did both, and then we were a good team, but we need to be like that for 90 minutes. I think that it's interesting how I think it's interesting because he always talks about the fans. He wants to be able to have that good energy with the fans. He's not daft. He will know that we're pissed off about how the league has ultimately developed. He has, in my opinion, overly protected some players in terms of some of the criticism that's been aimed towards them and then coming out to bat for some of them. But he is trying to get into a space where he can muster a team that's going to be able to play in this cup final. And he was right, as far as I'm concerned, in his comments. And there's probably a part of me that I think would be really, really pissed off if he decided after the game to be able to come out and be, full of praise, full of positivity, etc., in terms of what's happened, because he's never going to admit this publicly, but he must be so incredibly frustrated at the performance dip of some of these players. We can't talk about commitment, Ross, because you and I don't see what happens at Auchenhowie every day. So he's the only person that can make that assessment. Um, I think we can guess in terms of where certain players have been, and who's turning it in training and who's maybe taking it down a notch. If you are leaving Rangers, then like anyone in their notice period, I don't necessarily think that it's fair to say that you're going to continue giving 110% when you're potentially going to be heading out the door in a few short weeks. But I was encouraged, shall I say, in terms of how animated he was about this. And I think if something is going to remain, it's going to linger in his head. I'm saying this now before we get to the Scottish Cup final, before we either end up with one trophy or two trophies this season, that he needs to take that anger and that passion and that desire into the summer signings, into pre-season, and most importantly, into the beginning of next season. And so for me, I'm actually quite pleased with what I've seen for a part of that, because we've seen very recently Rangers managers come out and not show that commitment in terms of what he wants from his team. So I think it was quite interesting to see his reaction. I think that it bodes well for us, if that makes sense. I don't want to overread the situation for sure, but I do want to be able to have a manager who is simply going to make harsh assessments on players about what their next steps will be. And if you are going to go in and establish standards for new intake, for the guys that you have to bring in the door, everybody has to be able to understand that. And and I think we've all said it at various times, that he can't get that from his leadership group, which hopefully soon is going to be disbanded anyway. But if he can't get it from those players, he has to be able to set the standard. And if you're not going to follow that as a player, then you're not going to succeed at Rangers.
I think that press conference, or at least those comments, have been in the post for a while. Clement has expended a lot of the capital, the well-earned capital that he had from the Rangers support, defending those players after horrendous performances, horrendous results. You think of Dingwall and Dundee back-to-back, where people were angry with him for not coming out and making comments similar to this. But at that point, we're still in a title race and we still had a chance of winning the league. It was a slim chance at that point, but it was a chance nonetheless. So I wasn't too surprised or overly critical from memory about him being so protective over the players, because I think it would have been worse if he'd came out in that moment and really went through them. It's probably not what he felt they needed at that point. He needed somebody to go out and bat for them and try and shield them, however unsuccessfully, from the criticism they were getting. But he is in a place now where, because he has done that for those players, he's came out to bat for them, he's came out to try and be a human shield, where he's earned the right to have those kind of harsh words in a press conference, especially the ones that I noted David tweeted last night, and I'm quoting here: if they want to play for a lesser team, they can do one moment good, one moment bad. But here, if they want to play for Rangers, they need to do both parts of the game all the time. And how well does that sum us up over the past few months, where you'd have one moment a player creating an absolute moment of brilliance that might lead to a goal or a chance or a big moment, while completely phoning it in at the other end, or vice versa. Maybe a good defensive moment followed by an absolute nonsense up front. That both parts of the game has to come in tandem, and if you want to be successful, it absolutely has to come in tandem. And it's fantastic that Clement has communicated that to us as fans, that he recognises that as well. Not that I think I ever particularly doubted it. He's a successful manager. He has won leagues before. He knows what it takes to get over the line, but he also knows that getting over the line with a squad with the limitations that we have, that he's been able to see up close over the last few months, is much more easier said than done. And he's done a remarkable job to get us into a position where we were competing for the title so late on into the season. But for him to have that recognition that here at Rangers, just competing for a title is never going to be good enough. It's never going to be good enough. You need to win the damn thing at the end of it. That's such an encouraging set of comments for the manager to make. And as I say, because he has built that bank of press conferences where he's maybe said things that he doesn't believe himself, especially after Dundee, where I think he kind of came out and said, actually, we played really well and we tested the goalkeeper. Right, it was bullshit. There's no way he could have watched that game and thought that was the 90 minutes that had just unfolded. He's a smart guy, right? But he's using that capital that he built up with the Rangers fans to be able to try and provide them that level of protection, and in doing so has earned the right to go out and criticise them for a performance, especially in the first half like they demonstrated last night. And if more of those players could have repaid that in him sooner, then, as I've said throughout this podcast, we could be having a very different discussion, but these players do what these players do.
Yep, and so onwards to Tynecastle to finish off the season, Ross. It's going to be a game where my hope is that, given that lambasting that we've just mentioned there from Clement, and being able to try and set a degree of a standard in terms of the build up to the cup final, as we wrap up the league, I am hoping for two things. First of all, those players are looking at being able to. Well, actually, I'm going to change that slightly and say three things. First of all, those players who can use the sentiment from the manager and that inspiration from the manager to be able to really step up their game, use Tynecastle as a chance to say, I want to put myself into serious consideration for a place within the cup final team. I want to ensure that whatever that midfield that he's going to start with is going to be the same one that starts at Hampden, because I genuinely think there'll be riots in Mount Florida if we see a team lineup that includes John Lundstrom. And the third thing is, for me, as I touched on earlier on, just make sure that you get there and get out with no injuries. It's absolutely the last thing that we need. If we can use it again to give Ridvan Yilmaz some more time in his legs to be able to build him up to potentially 90 or 2 hours worth of football, then fantastic. But make it as competitive as a dead rubber can be.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the only possible omission on Saturday that I would like to see in the midfield going into the Scottish Cup final is obviously Dujon Sterling. It should be a midfield three of Raskin, Diamandi and Sterling. Hampden, no ifs, no buts. That's just the team, Phil. If you're listening to it, thank you very much. You're right about Yilmaz as well. I think we're in a process of trying to build him up to 90 minutes for that cup final. don't suspect that he would play the full 90 on Saturday. You might see Robbie Fraser again getting some minutes, which would be really, really good for him. Outside of that, it's difficult to try and muster any kind of enthusiasm for this game. I get that. I totally do appreciate that. But there is still, you need to try and remain competitive going into that Scottish Cup final, because if you do take your foot off the gas, it's very difficult to put the throttle back down again. So there need to be some level of hunger just for the points, if nothing else, or for performance, if nothing else, and some momentum again that you can take going into Hampden, because if we stutter and splutter at Tynecastle on Saturday and the performance is crap and we draw one each or something like that, then nobody goes into Hampden with any kind of confidence. And that's a limited resource as it is anyway at the minute. So we need to be able to see something quite out of the blue, something that we've perhaps not seen from this Rangers side for a few months, which is a really strong, confident, coherent performance where we take a Hearts side that will be on the beach anyway, put them to the sword and build up a bit of confidence in ourselves going into that Scottish Cup final. That's really all you can ask from this game on Saturday. We'll have the chat next week as well going into that game, and that'll all be about what can we do, what maybe could be changed from Saturday, who gets to start. We'll have that discussion when it comes, but right now it's all about do the biz on Saturday, try and build yourself a wee bit of confidence, a wee bit of momentum behind you going into that cup final, and then we'll see what comes.
Yep, I think that's perfectly fair. We obviously will have all of the build up to next week's Old Firm over on our Patreon site. If you are not a member, then please jump over and check it out. It's also going to be a great resource for all of your Rangers material as we wrap up the entire season. Following next weekend, David will be back on Monday with the flagship to cover the game at Tynecastle. I'll be back next Thursday on Extra with the build-up as we go to Hampden. Thank you to our executive producers, Mike Lee and Paul Myers. Thank you to our extra show sponsor, Zenith Coins. Please check them out at zenithcoins.com. Most importantly for me, thank you so much, Ross, for being able to come on. It was a wet, windy night at Ibrox. We ran out deserved winners, in my opinion. And I think we've been fair in terms of our analysis about what we can try and muster for these two particular games as we have a massive one next weekend.
No, thank you very much for having me on, Cammy, and thank you again to you for all the work you've done on Extra over the course of the season. It's some shift you put in, week out, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be a part of it whenever you've had me on. So well done to you. Good luck for the one next week, and good luck to your team listeners over the next two games.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for listening. As I say, we will be back on Monday. But if you can't wait until then, as I say, jump on over to our Patreon site. It's much appreciated. Have a brilliant weekend, folks. If you're heading across to Tynecastle, I hope the Rangers put on a result for you as well. And we will be back with you very, very soon. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Bye-bye now.